Welcome to Growth Hack by Poppy Digital. Tips and tricks to master the algorithms from industry insiders. Now here's your host, Julian Espinoza.
Welcome back to Growth Hack, where we break down marketing channels like Google, Facebook, Instagram, and show them how to make them work for you. The privacy movement has changed marketing forever. Our ability to track results continues to dwindle. These technologies aim to protect people's privacy online. From iOS 14 to Google's new Privacy Sandbox, what has led us down this path? It's always one of those stories that one person ruined it for all of us. Well, today on Growth Hack, we bring on Simon Poulton to talk to us about the past and what the future holds for tracking marketing results. Simon is the Vice President of Digital Intelligence at Wpromote. He oversees analytics development, data analysis, and analytics solutions teams. He sets the vision for the future of digital measurement and actively engages with business leaders to democratize digital marketing analytics, allowing organizations to make confident, data-backed decisions. Welcome, Simon.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Very excited to have this conversation, and I think our audience is going to be really stoked on what you have to say.
Oh, well, hey, look, I'm excited to be on your show. I think you've had some great guests of late, and honestly, I'm just excited to talk about the world of privacy and what that really means for us. Because there's a lot of really hot takes out there, and some of them are good, and some of them are just like, that's not happening. Like the remarketing is not going away in totality. So I think it'll be good to maybe get rid of a few of those myths and really dive into what's actually happening and where we're actually going.
Where did this all begin, and how did we get here?
Initially, there wasn't too much concern about the utilization of various different tracking mechanisms, things like cookies, and when you go online, just be smart about things. I remember when I was growing up, my parents would say, like, you're not going to purchase anything online, and then Amazon came around and we said, like, oh, okay, we're going to buy everything online, and that really, I think, started a lot of this awareness around the nature of privacy online. So it's not necessarily something that we've always talked about, but it is something that it's been there as an idea of how much information can be extracted from a user or from an individual that perhaps they haven't given you active consent to acquire from them. So when we really think about the modern era, I think a lot of this began around 2017, 2018, and really looking at some of these things like the do not track signal that was included in various web browsers. This idea that you can click a box and that's going to allow you to tell whatever website you're at, hey, please don't track me, I'm asking politely. But those websites are going to say, and they did say, well, we don't care, and we're going to track you. If you're on our premises, that's what we're going to do. And I think it really started, that's where the pendulum started swinging back and forth. So it immediately was like, that's a kind regard. We're not going to take that under provision. We're going to move on, and we're going to keep tracking you. And then we started to see things like Safari's intelligent tracking prevention. So I think that's really the first big moment in time that digital marketers truly became aware of the limits that could be enforced by browsers. And of course, when we're talking about iOS 14, we're talking about apps, but that is the next frontier of this. So ITP in its design was really looking to rein in cookies and this idea that you'd go to a website, and this still happens. I went to I go to Reddit quite a bit, and I looked at my cookies that were being stored, and there's a cookie that's stored from Reddit for 14 years. It's mind-boggling. I certainly won't be using this computer in 14 years, but it means that no one's thought about this. No one has thought about how long is an acceptable amount of time to keep data on somebody, especially if they haven't consented. And that the nature of ITP is something that we started to then see creep into other areas of Apple's products. So that's where ATT came from, was this original idea of consent-based tracking, this idea of tracking limitations. So when we reach the point of the ATT release, and by the way, I think it's important that we do go into ATT and talk about what that is. As we reach that point, there was already a lot of momentum behind this, especially from Apple in particular, saying we really do not think that we can trust the broader internet, that we can trust any of these folks out there, because people, quite honestly, do not know what information they're sharing with the broader world.
And this podcast, we don't usually dedicate too much to the whys, more so like what we can do, but just let's marinate in a second. Why Apple? Why is Apple caring about this?
I think it's an interesting situation that Apple is in here, and really they're taking the stance that government's not going to do anything about this, and they're probably right that we aren't going to see federal level legislation for quite some time. We did see it in the EU, but it's a very different system over there. And so when Apple's coming to this, one, they're looking at it from going, look, there's benefit to the public, but two, they're also looking at this going, we don't make that much money from ads. Facebook does. Google does. All these other folks out there do as well. And so there are some, and I subscribe to some of these theories too, that, hey, this is Apple looking to level the playing field when it comes to contextual marketing and the ability to target different individuals, because they're looking at this going, we can launch our own ads product, but we can't do anything as powerful or as really as directly targeted as what Facebook had. But they're really just trying to disrupt the digital marketing ecosystem, knowing that Facebook is a powerhouse there. And I think the saddest thing really that came out of the ATT change was it did hurt Facebook. ATT, or App Tracking Transparency, there's a technology component, but there's really just a policy component here. And the policy of ATT is if a user, that a user must be prompted when they open the app for an ability to opt into tracking. If the prompt is not showing, automatically opted out. There's also a setting on iPhones that allows you to not even see these prompts, and you'll never receive it, so you can never even opt into tracking. What that did, though, is it created a lobotomy between web data and app data. So when you think about Facebook's ecosystem of data that they have access to, a lot of it's based on what you do on the app, but then again, a lot of that's just like me and my friends or pictures of parties and events that I've been to. But a lot of the really meaningful information that they'll get is actually coming from outside of their walls. So what ATT did is it put it sliced right down the middle and mitigated the fact that you can take that data over. Now that impacted both targeting, but also the ability to bring in that conversion data. So what we then saw was Facebook still gets this data. Facebook still has all this information coming to them, but they now have to actively purge this data upon receipt. So they know all of this data that they're seeing. It's a pretty cruel twist. If you're on the Facebook side, you're seeing all this great data come through, and you're like, can't use any of it. Have to purge it all, and then we have to model. And that modeling is such a critical issue here, because one, it takes time to model. And when you think about sampling, and you think about, for example, if when they run those presidential approval rating polls and they'll ask 300 Americans, and you go, do they really represent the hundreds of millions of us that weren't polled in this? And then they say, yeah, Biden's got a 45% rating. And then you see a little plus or minus 5% at the bottom of the screen. You go, oh, wow, that's a lot of volatility. So either he's at 50 or he's at 40. That's the nature of modeling. That's the nature of sampling. And that's really what we're looking at here with what Facebook and other platforms are being forced to do, is they've had to take this approach that they just cannot be as accurate as they want to be. And Facebook even came out and admitted themselves, yeah, we think we're around 10 to 15% undercounting the conversions that we're seeing on our platform. That's not that difficult, though, when you get a lot of data for these big brands to overcome. So if you're a really big brand with 1,000 conversions a day, all that data's coming in, that's awesome, because your modeling is going to be a lot more accurate. But if you're a small mom and pop brand, you maybe only get 10, 20 conversions a day. That's really difficult to model.
So it's interesting that Apple is doing this. Why hasn't Google done this yet?
One, they're trying to stay out of the crosshairs. And two, when they think about the way that they're working within the broader advertising ecosystem, they are active out there. And so when Google's been talking about a lot of their approach to privacy, they aren't so concerned with trying to police the entire ecosystem. Rather, they're trying to, I think, transparently, they're a lot more concerned about themselves and their own market share, and looking at this as, never waste a good crisis, right? Like, this is a great opportunity for them to try and make a land grab. And I've had some very interesting conversations with folks over the past couple of years, all about the Privacy Sandbox and the various privacy proposals that Google has. The problem is when we think about the folks who are really in charge of a lot of these decisions over at in the Web3 consortium, there's a lot of disagreement. There's a lot of Google, you can't be the ones to police us, and so Google's still very much lagging behind in what they're trying to do, because they are trying to find this happy medium the whole time of, well, how can you have a privacy-preserving advertising ecosystem? And all of the extreme privacy advocates, like the folks like John Weilander, they're the ones going out there going, You should have no degree of contextual targeting at all. You shouldn't even know that I'm on a website about cat food right now. Even if you're advertising cat food on that website, can't do it. I don't want any of that happening. And so you get an extreme polarization that's happening there. And I think that Google is trying to, Google has multiple partners in this ecosystem. Two of the big ones, of course, they've got consumers. They are huge. But they've got advertisers, and then they have publishers. And both of those groups are incredibly important not to not to scare, not to create concerns around. So I think Google is going to taking a very slow and deliberate approach here. So it's something they talk about a lot, but that's it. It's talk.
So the question is for you: have you seen campaigns like, let's say, a Facebook campaign? Have you seen a Facebook campaign run specifically just on Android?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as ATT came out, there were a lot of folks going, we should just run on Android, or we should just try and take a few novel approaches here. And I certainly have seen that. I would note though that, even though ATT is cutting off the web from the app environment, it still doesn't diminish the fact that you can target those individuals on iOS devices within the app environment. So that's still absolutely very possible. And beyond that, you can also still use custom audiences because they are not subject to the ATT requirements. And so this is where we start to get it's a kind of dicey gray area where I will tell brands, if you have a consumer's information, they've consented to tracking with you, and they've given you their email. You can use that email. You can upload that to Facebook as a custom conversion and utilize that path. And Facebook is then not subject to the ATT purging requirement. That's a really interesting, nuanced angle there. I don't think it gets, Facebook can't go out and talk about that because as soon as they do, people are like, oh, Facebook's trying to subvert the rules. And the question becomes, well, are the rules appropriately set? Are they agreed upon universally, and are these things that we should all be adhering to? Or is Apple really just trying to some degree, do some virtue signaling? But really, is Apple just trying to hurt the ecosystem? Because when you look at what Apple's done and you look at the prompt they forced on ATT and it said, tracking for advertising across the web and all other apps, like that's really scary and kind of damning. And then when you look at Apple's own privacy prompt, it's like, would you allow us to track you for personalization? And it's just hard to believe that came from the same mouth. And you're like, how can you be so disingenuous with the way that you approach it versus what you allow others to do?
So can you talk and speak about what's actually going on right now in the state of affairs as they stand when it comes to marketing campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my favorite expressions or phrases words that's come out is the Cookiepocalypse. And I often get asked a lot about the Cookiepocalypse and what's going to happen when cookies go away. And I think that there's maybe a fundamental disconnection between what is being prognosticated to be happening versus what we're actually seeing. So when we talk about cookies going away, we're really talking about third-party cookies. That's the first note here. So first-party cookies, they absolutely still exist. They can absolutely still push data into Facebook and Google and various other platforms. Where the disconnect, I think, comes from is from the identity signals that are available. So some of the changes that have happened of late are tied to actually iOS 15 IP address obfuscation. Now, some folks will say, that's not that big of a deal because we already lost all those users with ATT, and that's fair. And for what it's worth, we should have consent-based tracking. But the approach that is being taken here is one where these signals are just being completely obfuscated. And so I've even seen some studies where they're saying, yeah, the IP address could be within 100 miles of a user. Well, that actually starts to have some really interesting issues with functionality of websites. And if I am in an area where I watch MLB TV, and can I watch the Dodgers legally on TV? That starts to get very interesting. So there are these user identity signals that are diminishing. That is an active process that is happening. That is through the lens of various browsers. There's a website I'd recommend folks check out. It's called cookiestatus.com. It's by a guy called Simo Ahava. It's just a really great resource on what every single browser is doing when it comes to privacy, because some of them are just like, Chrome, where they're saying, yeah, we've got the Privacy Sandbox, it's on the way, but it's not here yet. So what have you done? Nothing. And then you look at Safari and they're just going, yeah, we've got 7-day window limits on cookies, on first-party cookies. So even if you set a cookie for Reddit, for example, for 14 years, if you set that, doesn't matter because they'll purge after 7 days. So that's one component that's happening. And then on the other side, we are seeing more and more limits being applied to data that can be passed between ecosystems. So this is all very real. I think we've seen this for quite some time. This whole problem of, you can't get Facebook impression data to join with other platforms. That is only going to continue. So we are seeing the solidification of the silos really bubbling up. That's an active process that is happening right now. That's why we are seeing platforms like Facebook and TikTok bring commerce into their ecosystems, because they're planning on making these the walled garden one-stop shop for your friends, your commerce, your everything. And they're doing that because of the data loss that exists between these walls. So I think that there are some very interesting issues that bubble up because of that. But the biggest thing that folks can be doing throughout this journey is realizing everything is fragile. Every network that I've ever gone and advertised on, I might not know who my audience is on there anymore. And so you really do need to think about owning your audience, which I think is, again, such an overused phrase, but it's one that does have some very valuable meaning when you really dissect what that means. And when you think about being operationally flexible in the future. And when we think, when the next TikTok comes along, are you going to be ready for that in terms of being able to bring your audience there? Because they will be moving whether or not you like it or not.
I think the keynote here from it, or the concept, is like, you got to be able to stay nimble. You got to be able to adapt. And so I think that leads us to like our final, one of the most important questions. What's the future, and how do you stay nimble? Because that's another thing that you hear, not just in marketing, you hear that across all business sectors. You hear that in all kinds of different concepts. So I don't want to be the next guy saying, let's stay nimble, everyone. How do we stay nimble in marketing?
Yeah, so to me, staying nimble, there's a variety of functions that go into it, but one of them is really looking at where the puck is going. And I think as marketers, we just inherently can be very reactionary to changes that we see, and we go, oh, ATT has happened, and oh my God, the sky's falling. And the sky did fall a little bit. I'm not going to debate that. Absolutely, it happened. But when you think about the future of what's going to be happening with privacy, there will be a data zero moment. And what I mean by that is there will be a point in the near future, potentially in the next 18 to 24 months, where the ability to receive any kind of identity parameters from the browser will be mitigated in totality.
Do you really think that's going to happen in the next 24 months?
I do. I don't know if you've had the chance to read the Google Privacy Sandbox proposal, but there's a concept in there called the privacy budget. And that's tied to these really specific identifiers like IP address, like user agent, all of these items that they're basically saying, we are going to create a way that these will still be available for you, but they will not be able to be pinned down to one individual. And so that's what we're seeing from Google. They're taking a cohort-based approach. So while you may still be able to resolve a user's identity once they're logged into an environment, and we're going to see a lot more of that, of a lot more logging into different places, once you're able to, you can resolve it that way. But if it's an unknown individual, you will not have the ability to pin them down one-to-one. They will be part of a cohort. And that's a big challenge for us.
So that's a very interesting point. And we've been talking about a project for the last 2 years with a particular client where, how do we create this climate and this personalized experience when someone lands on the website, and encouraging them to log in and have this personalized experience? So maybe that's where we're headed. We're headed towards personalized experiences, because then we can get someone to log in. So it's like creating this idea of like, okay, hey, you land on the website for the very first time, or you've exhibited some shopping behaviors, and now you get this sort of offering where it's like, hey, create this personalized experience. And I think one of the first places, and again, not to go too much in history, but just for some context, and also because this helps for people here, one of the first places that really, I think, started solving the personalization was the mattress companies. They were doing this personalization of like, okay, well, how much do you weigh? How tall are you? Are you a side sleeper? Are you a stomach sleeper? Are you a back sleeper?
Do you like a firm or a soft? Yeah, exactly. My wife and I are completely different profiles, by the way. It makes it havoc buying a bed.
And so if you can imagine, extrapolate that, that's how you create that personalized experience for someone on your website. So maybe, and I don't want to take the words out of your mouth, but maybe heading more towards a personalized shopping experience on your website could get us closer to not the sky not falling.
Right. I mean, I think there are components of that, but I also think that if you're if you're like a CPG brand listening to this right now, and you're sitting there going like, okay, well, it's great for mattress companies and for sporting apparel companies, but I sell cat food. There are, and maybe there's a couple things you can do there. Or I sell pencils. Sometimes there are things that you don't care too much about the degree of personalization because the price point isn't there, and you're just like, I go through a bunch of pencils, like I don't care, just regular number 2 pencil. That mindset though is one that I think is going to be very interesting. Not this idea that you'll need to create profiles everywhere you go, but that we will see more profile conglomerate groups. Shopify is one I look at in particular. I think Shopify has immense power in the future. They will be the next Amazon when we think about their ability to create these logged in experiences. They're already doing it at the point of payment with Shop Pay. It's not too far to believe, hey, we've identified this as an individual that has a Shopify account. We are going to have them log in for this experience because, hey, I don't know, even as simple as you get Shopify points for it and you can use those across the board. They've been doing a lot of moves here to make that happen. And then it's the same thing that we're seeing within the walled gardens. So I think the $1 million question here is really, how many logins are too many, and how do you think about not overwhelming your users during their experience versus providing an experience that is complementary and not going down this path that I think we've sort of gone down now, which is every time I go to a website, there's 5 different pop-ups and there's a chat box and a deal and a cookie consent ban and all these things. I'm like, this is a terrible experience. I just want to be able to buy these things.
Well, Simon, it was so great to have you on the show. I mean, I know I personally learned so much. I took 3 of your concepts just even off our initial phone call, and I was like researching and reading about all this stuff, the Google Sandbox, and there was just you are an encyclopedia when it comes to privacy, and you are leading the charge. So I know that some people are going to be really stoked on this. I know some people might be like, some people may have not even made it to the end of this episode. For the people have made it to the end of this episode and are really appreciative of this information. Where can they get more information from you, and where can they follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. So transparently, what I love about this industry is the community and just connecting with folks and talking about these ideas. And if it scares you, that's probably a good thing. It probably means that you want to do something about it. So certainly I'd love to connect with folks, obviously over on LinkedIn, but I'm super active on Twitter, and I've got a great group of people over there, the privacy Twitter folks that I've got. I'll tweet out a link to it. But you can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/SPoulton. That's SPOULTON. And I would love to connect with you and just talk about all things digital privacy and really, what the future has in store.
Well, again, Simon, thanks for coming on the show. You guys heard it here. Follow him on Twitter, SPoulton, POULTON. All right, guys, thanks for listening. We'll have you back on the show soon, Simon.
Awesome. Would love it. Cheers.